Imagine sitting one day, just lounging, nice day like this, and you're underneath an apple tree, and all of a sudden an apple falls off the tree, and you're like, I wonder why that apple didn't go sideways or just when it fell, go up. Isaac Newton was thinking that one day as he was sitting underneath his apple tree. And long story short, he came up with the concept of gravity. Here's the calculation or the equation for gravity. If you were to ask me this, I would have no clue. I just want to confess this morning that I failed the physics regents 4 times here in New York State. I'm not sure why that's funny. The only reason I passed it was because they curved it, but it combined my 2 worst subjects, math and science, together. So I'm really out of my ballpark right now sharing this concept with you. But this is the concept of gravity. And this tree and gravity have kind of spread out in a couple different ways. Like, number one, there's a lot of places around the world, like this is the University of York in London, who they went to the original tree and they grafted off some of the tree. And there's places around the world that have regrown this apple tree, saying this is a part of this history, this is a part of the gravity. You could even find some, I think, at one of the University of Wisconsin campuses around the country, this was the tree. But also, scientists say that satellites, this equation for gravity, was one of the things that made satellites flying around the globe possible. And so it's not just something that was a good idea. It was an equation that they were able to mathematically figure out a lot of really cool things, which I really can't talk about because it's way out of my league, way over my head. However, though, what I do know this morning is Paul is going to give us a calculation of sorts, or he's going to help us calculate something in our Christian lives. And really, that's how intentional he's asking this concept to be this morning. So if you have a Bible, you can turn me to Philippians chapter 2, and we're going to begin in verse 1. And if not, it'll be up here on the screen for all of us together. He begins verse 1 like this. He says, "So if there is any encouragement in Christ, any comfort from love, any participation in the Spirit, any affection and sympathy," he says, "complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and one mind." He says here, basically he's saying, hey, if you're a follower of Christ, if you've had a connection with Jesus, if you're full of the Holy Spirit, he says, complete my joy by being of the same mind or one purpose. This idea of completing joy, it's not looking that he's not looking to get his joy fully out of a group of people and how they interact with one another. What he's saying is, the letter he's writing to the church of Philippi, what he's saying to them is, church, if you live in unity with purpose together, he's like, it's like the icing on the cake. It's like my cup is at the fullest and it's going to overflow now. So there is an added layer of joy, which we've been talking about this whole time. How do we find joy in life? Well, it's Jesus, it's others, and then ourselves. We're going to see this formula through chapter 2. Here's a calculation for you this morning. If you're looking for joy, it's about Jesus in your life fully, giving your life to Jesus. Secondly, it's about how do you view other people and where do you place them in your life? And then lastly, placing yourself last. And so he's saying it's like, this is the icing on the cake, church. If I can see you live in unity and in purpose. So this is how we say it builds off of last week. Last week we looked at the idea of being a citizen of heaven. And a citizen of heaven is one who stands and fights with one purpose to advance the mission of Christ. So he's saying, church, you are called to be citizens of heaven by the way you live together with purpose for advancing the gospel. So he's building off of this and saying, it will complete my joy if you live this way. And we're going to see now that he gives now a greater formula for doing that, a greater joy for completing this idea of a same mind or one mind. The formula is not going to look like this per se. Glad it doesn't, because I'd be out of luck. But it looks like this. He says this: do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Again, I'm not sure where you're at in your walk with Christ. It doesn't matter where you're at. This right here is a game changer for anything. If you play on a sports team, that first line, will help you win championships. If you're in the workplace, this line will help you succeed in the workplace. But as followers of Christ, he's saying this is the formula for living in one purpose or one mind. He says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility, count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. So the first thing he says here in this formula or calculation, he says, do nothing in your life out of selfish ambition, and do nothing in your life out of empty conceit. What does this really mean? What does this look like? This is, to me, one of the easiest ways to boil this concept down. Number one, selfish ambition is the pursuit of personal goals. Number two, empty conceit is the pursuit of personal glory in life. Selfish ambition is personal goals. Empty conceit is personal glory. Let's dive into that a little bit more. What do you believe? What would be a pursuit of a personal goal? What would be a personal goal that someone would have that would get in the way, that would be more of an selfish ambition that would get in the way of this? So what would be the goal? What would be a goal someone would have in life? Can you give me something like that? Okay, a promotion, okay? That could be a certain amount of money, okay? So many home runs. Could be, yeah. Is that so? So that's where selfish ambition. Is it a selfish ambition? What else? Anything other concepts come to our minds? Fancy car. Okay, so this is where our minds usually go, and all of those are right to some extent. But Paul wants us to get even a little deeper. He's saying a personal goal would be, I like to have control. And when control is taken from me, I'll do selfish things to gain it back. He's saying that there's sometimes in life, I don't like to do certain things. I don't like to engage in a certain way or partake in certain things. Like maybe it's like I don't like to speak in front of other people. So I'll do anything I can to make sure that that's a goal. The goal is to not do something. So I'll do anything I can, and it might turn into a selfish ambition so I don't have to do that. It's a deeper way to think about this idea. It's a goal you have, something you're trying to attain in your life. We think of goals and such a thing as these high-marking, achieving things. Paul is getting into the layers of our soul, and he wants to see like the things. You might have walked in here with something in your mind to say, I hope this happens in church today. And it didn't, and therefore maybe you're like, oh, that wasn't good, or I got to do this. That was a personal goal you were trying to have met in your life. We live our lives based a lot around our personal goals. Let's go some different directions. Maybe you are like, I just want life to be fun and easy. So that's the route you take in everything. There's a lot of selfishness that comes into that because you're not going to sign up to do something hard, which might include serving other people. I'm not saying what it is for you. I'm just throwing it out there to help cast a net for you to have to wade through where this is at in your life. Not often where we reach personal goals. But all of what you said is right, is correct as well, because we can do those things, promotion, money, cars, and we can do a lot with that. We can try to it gets us in the way of other people. We can stomp on somebody else. It takes money from here and gives it to something else. That's one way. The empty conceit is for the personal glory. Often, again, which we think is, oh, I just wish I'm up front. Or I wish I make it into this, I become a YouTube star. So every kid under the age of 12 wants to become now. I'm going to become a YouTube star. And I usually try to squash those dreams real quick and say you're not the 1% of the world who does. But empty conceit can be, personal glory means I want to keep my image the way I want it for other people to see, wherever that is. Right? So maybe, again, you don't like to be in uncomfortable situations because of how you look. So you'll avoid them. And in turn, how the pursuit of that leads to keeping disunity taking place. Again, he's getting deeper than just the layer, the top layer of it. He says, complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord of one mind. The mind, if we can go back to last fall's message, the mind is a soul care issue. Our souls are made up of our mind, our will, and our emotions. So he's getting into the layer of our souls that our selfish ambitions and our empty conceits are things that are taking place in our soul. And we have to take a step back to ask ourselves the question, am I arranging my life or managing my life that I'm trying to keep this all pieces put together? And in turn, it makes me live with selfish ambition and empty or vain conceit with my life because I'm trying to manage and control something rather than letting it go. So again, he says this is the soul care issue of selfish ambition and empty conceit. Let's look at this in two other ways. Number one is our time and our energy. Individuals can spend a lot of their time and energy maneuvering their lives around their personal goals and personal glory. God wants our time or times invested in a different way. Let's look about this for maybe you're serving in the church. Let's look at it from this perspective now. Burnout, serving with the wrong motives. When individuals serve the church and they're driven by a desire to prove themselves, please others, earn approval, gain control, earn favor, or position, burnout is more likely. When you're serving, or in this again, this is crossover. Maybe you're at work and you're working for the wrong reasons. And you're like, I'm just burnt out because you're doing it for the wrong reason. This is where he's getting deeper into the layers of selfish ambition, personal goals, empty conceit, personal glory. This is often what we can look like. There's a story told of two ships that are off the Black Sea, off the coast of Russia, and there's a report that there's been a collision between two ships. True story. And many were saying, okay, well, whose calculations were off? And come to find out, nobody's calculations were off. They literally were just headed towards one another, and neither one of them wanted to be the one to turn to the other side. They wanted the other person to do it based off their stubbornness and the will to win. So again, this is what this hits head on with. Looking at my life in comparison to the people I interact with, whether in church, on a daily basis, or how I interact with them. So Paul, again, gives us this formula. He says, do nothing out of selfish ambition. Think about that right now. Think about what he's saying there. He says, do what out of selfish ambition? Do what? Do a little bit? Do it when you're tired or when it serves you well? He says, do nothing. That's a pretty high call he's giving us. He says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility, count others more significant than yourself. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interests of others. So he says, this is the way we get there. It's through humility. Here's my equation. Hopefully, is that a greater sign up there or no? All right, so I did one math equation right this week. Humility, he's saying, is greater than selfish ambition and empty conceit. And actually, this word is a humility of the mind, which, get this, when Paul writes this, there is actually no word in the Greek language to describe this word. He pulls from another word because there was no word for the word humility in this culture. You want to know why? Because in that culture, they considered humility such a weakness that they had no word for it. Like, you are such a loser if you're humble. So there wasn't, like, this word doesn't even deserve a word. So he pulls from another word that was used to ridicule others, most commonly a slave, and it described what was considered base, common, unfit, or having very little value in life. And as we know, I've talked about this before. The Bible, number one, has come to challenge our reality, and Jesus came to take our lives and turn them upside down. And he's saying, in my kingdom, humility is of great value. Humility is of great value. And there's all sorts of different ways we can describe humility and what he's getting after. But he gives you really what it looks like. Humility is when you consider somebody else better than yourself. Right? Some people say humility is not thinking about yourself less, it's thinking less of yourself. Lowering yourself. And that's what we're going to see next week, how Jesus lived out this humility. We're going to see that next Sunday. But here's a couple things that we have to challenge ourselves when it comes to selfish ambition and empty conceit in the face of humility? What pride do you have? What pride are you carrying in your life? What pride do you carry? And again, we can look at things that might be negative, like I might view myself in a way that we'd consider negative, but at the end of the day, it's pride because I'm trying to hold up to a certain measure that I have for other people to see. Secondly, what excuses are you giving, right? We can excuse our way out of anything in our culture we live in. We can rationale ourselves out of anything in our culture. So if you say, like Paul will say, don't live, don't do anything, do nothing with selfish ambition, empty conceit. And then what we do is we say, but I have. But this. You know what just happened? That just erased everything Paul said. It's empty. When you put but in front of what he put, it's empty. There's nothing there anymore in that case. But this. It's empty. It erased the whole thing. And we do that. And then in our mind, what we do is we make a calculation in our mind as we begin to weigh what's more important to me, and I make an excuse for doing that thing over the other. Very easy to do. Very acceptable in our culture as well. Lastly, oftentimes, it's just having the awareness to go with it. Having the awareness that my natural bent in life is to consider myself more important than other people, having the natural bent to do things out of selfish ambition, and having the natural bent to do things out of empty conceit. We are all bent that way. That's our sinful nature. And it's okay to say we all lean that direction. If you sit here and say, that's not me, then that's definitely you. We need to have the awareness when we make decisions, when we interact with other people, that that's our leaning, and we need to do something to put something in our life to look at the other direction more often. We need to have those things in place. So Paul, again, gives us the rest of this formula, and he says, let each of you look out not only for his own interests, but also the interests of others. So he says here, in this text as well, as we look at this, when he gives it to us, he says how we count this. He says, but in humility, count others more significant than yourself. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but the interest of others. And so what he's actually saying there is he's actually using a word that would be used to calculate something. So what he's saying is when you have something going on in life, a situation or just life in general, you are called to pull back and calculate, am I walking towards selfish ambition and empty conceit over this instead? You might be really angry at something, and you're going to go give it to somebody and tell them how it is. You need to pull back and say, did I calculate if I'm after selfish ambition and empty conceit first? You have to deal with that first before you go and talk with that person. One of my favorite movies that has to do with math is Back to the Future. And if Doc had his calculations right, at 88 miles an hour, the flux capacitor would kick into gear, and they'd go into the future. We need to do the same thing. We need to say, if I have my calculations right now, I'm leaning towards selfish ambition. I'm leaning towards. This is a great way to do it, too. If you had a day that was empty on your calendar, what would you do with it? How much of that would be about self, right? And sometimes we have to kind of mix it in there, right? I get it. Sometimes we can say, oh, it's my family, but we have to be careful that our family doesn't just become an isolated bubble of the self either. But it's about other people, and how does that fit into that? So here's a couple questions to help you calculate this in your life. Number one, how does my decisions look out for the interests of others? So he's not just saying, well, look out for them. Think about them. He says, look out for their interests. How does my decision look out for the interests of others? Number two, when you make these calculations, you can ask yourself, are my decisions about my interests? And then we use the word but, and then we make an excuse. Are they about that? Then lastly, you can ask yourself, what blind spots do I have? Because I often don't even see some of the decisions I make as a pursuit of personal goals or personal glory. I'm just doing that, and here's why. We've often created habits and lifestyles that we haven't even realized we've been living that way until we pull back and make the calculation. Oh, I've been living this way. Or it comes to something, or a big thing in the road, and you're like, oh, I have been living this way. Help me not to live this way. So what blind spots do you have? Next week, we're going to see, Paul says, hey, you want to see somebody who did this? Right? Show me somebody, right? No one can do that. Show me somebody. And Paul says, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. He's going to give the example of Christ. And that's where we're going to go next week, to see the example of Christ, to say, this is what Jesus did. And now, as we look at these first couple of verses of Philippians 2, Paul says, this is not how you begin to integrate this and implement this into your life. So this week, I want you to do two things. First one, I want you to just pray. Not necessarily just, when I say the word pray, I don't mean just get, in some comfy chair for 5 minutes and go like this. That's not what I'm asking you to do. But it means have a conversation throughout the day as you're driving, as you're interacting with your coworkers. In the back of your head, just ask, Lord, reveal my pride to me. Reveal my pride. Where am I about myself? Where am I about myself? Reveal my pride. Secondly, I want you to this week, I want you to take the time to calculate the interests of others. You might not have to go far. You might just be able to go to a spouse and say, how am I going to calculate their interests a little greater this week? Maybe it's a coworker, but ultimately what he's getting at is the church as well. He's writing to the church about their interactions with one another. Calculate the interests of other people. Right? Calculate them. This is a great way to think about it too. Think about your level of engagement with the church. Wherever that level is for yourself, whatever that next step is, what's keeping you from that? Is it, and this isn't to shame us or anything, but it's just to help us think through that. Sometimes we don't take a next step because we've calculated something in our mind a certain way of how we want, right? And so ask God, what is it that you'd want? How do you want my calculation maybe to be different? To look different? Or maybe it's, right, but I want to hold on to these personal goals I have. That's where we get in trouble. When we use the word personal goal, we got to be careful. Because is our personal goal God's goal for our life? And is our personal glory, right? It's ultimately about Christ's glory in our lives. So calculate the interest of other people. Again, I'm not preaching to you this morning saying, hey, I got these calculations figured out in my life. Listen, you had to hear this for about 30 minutes. I had to deal with it for 7 days. So as I thought about this and prayed about this for this week, we all struggle with this, right? Let's just be honest, right? We struggle with it. This is one of the biggest things that holds the church back from being together on purpose, on mission, is these individual pursuits we have in life. How do we let go a little bit? Maybe it's one step at a time to begin to calculate the interest of other people more. Start small if you have to. Start with someone, your neighbor, someone you're going to come across at the grocery store this week, whatever it is. We asked as we began that God would speak to us, and I pray that he has in some way to say, you know what, I'm going to pursue this. Again, it's a process in our lives. So you're not going to wake up tomorrow having ever solved this issue. but it's a pursuit that you have to elevate Christ. And as Paul is going to say, have the same mindset as Jesus.